Welcome to Virtual Wednesdays at the DeYoung. My name is Francesca D'Alessio, and I'm so pleased that you joined us tonight. Last week, YouTube crashed 1 minute before our live talk about AI and anxiety with Ken Goldberg. His talk is now available to view on our YouTube page. Tonight's program is in support of the exhibition Frida Kahlo, Appearances Can Be Deceiving, now on view at the DeYoung Museum. The exhibition highlights Frida Kahlo's personal items on view for the first time on the West Coast. Tonight, we have a special talk with Frida in America author and scholar Celia Stahr. Learn more about Kahlo's time in the States and the impact it made on her personal and artistic journey. Join me in welcoming Celia Stahr while she explores and celebrates Frida Kahlo's complex and fascinating artistic journey. Thanks so much, Celia.
Well, thank you, Fran, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you also, Maria Ego Avil, for all your help in getting this talk together. And I also just want to give a special thank you to the DeYoung curator, Hilary Alcott. First, I'm thanking you for your beautiful exhibition, Frida Kahlo, Appearances Can Be Deceiving, that you definitely helped to create. And also, I just want to thank you for your enthusiastic and warm response to me and to my book those many months ago, before COVID was even a word in our vocabulary. So I'm just really thrilled to be here tonight on the occasion of this exhibition, Frida Kahlo, Appearances Can Be Deceiving. And I also want to just thank all of you in the audience for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. And if you have any questions for me, feel free to write them in the chat and I'll answer them at the end. Porfirio Diaz looks in the mirror and sees his brown mestizo skin. He picks up a powder puff dusted in white and begins to cover his indigenous Mixtec ancestry. For 31 years, this military general led Mexico masquerading as a light-skinned Spanish man because he wanted to make his country over into a Europe of the New World. By 1910, this ideal that had permeated the social fabric of Mexican society began to unravel with the outbreak of revolution. 20 years later, while in San Francisco, the artist Frida Kahlo looks in the mirror and sees her light brown skin. She's thankful she didn't end up with her father's German complexion, commenting, "I remember the color of my father's skin, that I did not like it." She's happy to see her mother's darker skin and powerful deep-set eyes accented by her maternal grandmother's conjoined eyebrows. She parts her black hair down the middle and pulls it back into a low bun. She applies lipstick, places Aztec-inspired earrings in her earlobes, and clasps an Aztec jadeite necklace around her neck. Then, over her long peasant-style skirt and blouse, she wraps her shoulders with a rebozo, that ubiquitous shawl symbolizing Mexican women of all classes. But the way she crosses the shawl over her shoulders creates the look of a soldadera, a revolutionary female soldier who wore bullet-filled bandoliers crossed in front. Sometimes, when not in uniform, soldaderas wore their rebozos crossed in front to distinguish themselves as soldiers. They played a crucial role in the revolution, and their fame grew as the popular corrido, La Adelita, about a soldadera who fought for Francisco Madero's troops, came to symbolize the revolutionary spirit. After the revolution, the name Adelita became synonymous with any woman who fought for her rights. Frida identified with Adelita and the soldaderas, and while at a Mexican restaurant in San Francisco, she belted out the song La Adelita, proclaiming to her mother, "I was a hit." Frida knew when she posed for Imogene Cunningham that by arranging her rebozo in a similar fashion to the soldaderas and wearing Aztec-inspired jewelry, that she evoked the persona of the politically engaged Mexican nationalist. For Frida, who was still coming into her own as a 23-year-old woman, that identity was bound up with the image of the strong, independent, and at times cross-dressing soldaderas. Frida would soon start creating self-portraits that foregrounded her strength as well. This is what struck me the first time I saw a self-portrait with Monkey, a fierce warrior with black hair pulled back tightly, showing off a prominent forehead akin to an Aztec warrior, and a bird-like unibrow above intense brown eyes. A black spider monkey perched on her shoulder places its paw around this warrior's neck in a protective yet menacing pose that has the potential to strangle her as it clutches a red ribbon that loops around her neck and the monkey's. Yet Frida, the warrior, doesn't look fearful. This woman radiates power. She's proud of her brown skin and jet black eyebrows, as well as her facial hair just above and below her lips. Standing in front of a dense field of dark green leaves, her red hair ribbon and yellow shirt position her as a very different kind of woman in nature, a theme I'd seen previously in art, but which looked different. She doesn't stand nude in nature with an ethereal look on her face. She doesn't lie nude in nature, nor does she have a mask-like face as in Paula Modersohn-Becker's self-portrait with Amber Necklace. In some ways, she has the strong gaze and connection to nature of Leonardo's Mona Lisa. But Frida makes her connection to nature even stronger with the integration of the leaves, the monkey, and the warrior. Just look into the eyes of the warrior and the monkey. They are one and the same. They command this painting. Now, at the time I encountered this image, I was an undergraduate college student at San Francisco State, sitting in one of my first art history classes, and I had never heard of Frida Kahlo. I had just returned from a 3.5-month trip to East Africa, and before that, a trip to Mexico, and I was questioning what to do with my life. In that darkened art history lecture hall, when Professor Whitney Chadwick clicked the slide projector to advance to this painting of a fierce woman and her spider monkey, all the cliches you can imagine happened at once. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't stop staring. I just had to know who made this painting. I couldn't get this image of Frida out of my head, so I wrote my first art history paper on this then little-known Mexican painter. At the time, Hayden Herrera had recently published her groundbreaking biography and was promoting it on college campuses. I was overjoyed when I saw she was coming to San Francisco State. The more I learned about Frida, the more I wanted to know. I became immersed in my research for this art history paper and in the world of Frida. Just as traveling to East Africa and Mexico had opened me up to new ways of seeing the world, Frida Kahlo's self-portrait with Monkey helped to change my path in life. I decided to study art history in graduate school. Now, as most of you are probably aware, throughout the 1980s and into the 1990s, Frida's popularity grew as more and more people discovered the incredible art and life of this Mexican woman who was a trailblazer in so many ways. She was a radical in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s because she defied gender and racial stereotypes, both in life and her paintings. More and more books and articles were written, exhibitions were mounted, movies were made, and the merchandise kept coming. By the end of the 1990s, Frida had become famous, and I had begun to focus on other artists. I never stopped loving Frida's paintings. I just tucked her away while working on my PhD. But Frida wouldn't let go of me. In 2007, now teaching at the University of San Francisco, I had the opportunity to present a paper for a conference there that featured women artists working between the two world wars. As I pondered which artists I'd like to focus on, I realized that all the artists I'd ever read about from the interwar period were white Europeans. My interest had always been cross-cultural, so I thought Frida would be a fascinating artist because she was Mexican, yet she was in the United States between 1930 and 1933, a period that was instrumental in her development as an artist and the creation of her persona as a provocateur. Now, certainly scholars had discussed her important breakthrough paintings while in Detroit, such as Henry Ford Hospital and My Birth. But a fuller understanding of her creative process, which led to these breakthroughs, and her complex reactions to what she experienced in San Francisco, Detroit, and New York were missing. We knew a lot about her mature style, but not as much about her development as an artist. How did she get from two women in 1929 to the two Fridas 10 years later in 1939? Or from two women to Portrait of Ava Frederick? Or from Portrait of Mrs. Jean White to Portrait of Luther Burbank, created just 3 months later? Now, Frida's portrait of Mrs. Jean White is a well-constructed, lovely painting of this woman who, with her husband, Clifford White, lived in the same building as Frida and her husband, muralist Diego Rivera, at 716 Montgomery Street. With Jean's portrait, Frida combines aspects of a style she'd been working with in Mexico, which was inspired by colonial-style paintings and retablos, these small paintings created on tin that were made by local artisans and sold in the markets. They often have inscriptions, as seen on the left, giving thanks to Jesus, or in other cases, to Mary or a saint for saving a loved one from death. In Frida's case, the inscription of Mrs. Jean White identifies the sitter, the month and year it was painted, the city where it was painted, and the artist's name. When looking at the center painting by Bustos, we can see how Frida has borrowed elements as well, such as the green curtain and the visible back of the chair, as well as that strong gaze. And these are elements that you can zero in on and look at more closely if you attend the de Young's exhibition. As you can see, the portrait of Jean White is right here. But Frida had been working with some of these symbols before she came to San Francisco, as we can see here in the center painting, Self-Portrait Time Flies. This self-portrait was made shortly after she married Diego Rivera. She sets herself up as a woman of the people with her simple white top and Aztec jadeite necklace. The airplane above connects her to the changing modern world just outside her window. When she made the painting of Jean in San Francisco, she borrowed the green curtain and red tie back. And then she also borrowed the chair seen in the painting by Bustos. Jean, therefore, becomes a modern woman who sits in an interior setting coming out of Mexican-style paintings, but with a San Francisco cityscape behind her. This was the type of cross-cultural style Frida was working with in San Francisco. She tells us in letters that she had attempted some self-portraits, but she wasn't happy with them. But one that she did like was her self-portrait standing alongside her husband, Diego, seen here on the right. In this painting, entitled Frida and Diego Rivera, which is owned by the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, but is now on view at the de Young, Frida conveys some important differences between husband and wife. Diego stands tall, his feet firmly planted on the ground, with his brushes and palette in hand, next to Frida, who tilts her head toward her husband as if to convey her deference to the maestro. Now, most authors see the painting as an example of Frida as the wife to a larger-than-life artist. It's surmised that Frida didn't see herself as an artist at this early stage. But details matter when it comes to Frida's art. In terms of color, Frida's vibrant red rebozo, hugging her shoulders and hanging down in front of her green dress, really stands out. It catches the eye, drawing our attention to this Mexican woman who we learn from the banner above is the artist who created this painting for Albert Bender, one of the most important art patrons in the Bay Area. It was a smart move on Frida's part, as he loaned it to many exhibitions until 1935, when he donated it to the newly created San Francisco Museum of Art, today known as SF MoMA. The fact that Frida made this painting for Bender and placed the information in the ribbon above made me think that Frida was more ambitious than most people thought. When I began reading the hundreds of letters that Frida wrote home to family and friends, I discovered that my hunch was correct. Frida was ambitious. She wrote her mother on December 4th, 1930, less than 1 month after arriving in San Francisco, quote, "I am painting because they want me to have an exhibition before we go. It's a good opportunity for me to sell some things and help you more. And if I lose this chance, I will kick myself. Don't you agree? We will probably move to a hotel so I can paint all day instead of spending my time sweeping floors and stupid stuff like that." end quote. Although Frida and Diego did not move out of the artist's flat they shared with other artists at 716 Montgomery Street, a couple of weeks later, Frida told her mother, quote, "I'm painting quite a lot, almost all day long," end quote. By early February 1931, she reported, quote, "I've done 6 paintings already and people have liked them quite a bit," unquote. Now, while Frida's double portrait here, or sometimes called the marriage portrait, may seem to some to be a statement of her subordinate role within her marriage, if we look at an earlier drawing she made when she first arrived in San Francisco, and we look more closely at the placement of Frida's hand in her painting, the issue of power begins to shift. Because what we see is that in the drawing, Diego's hand is clutching onto her hand so tightly, we don't even see her hand. But in the painting, she changes it. Now her hand rests on top. Therefore, it gives her more power. And so this hand gesture, in conjunction with her choice of colors, the words in the banner above, and the clothing and jewelry that she wears are significant. I wanted to know more about Frida's creative development while living in San Francisco. I'd read that she turned heads while walking down the street wearing her beautiful, colorful outfits like the one seen here. But that didn't tell me anything about the impact San Francisco may have had upon her. What I discovered was that Frida's independent spirit was championed by her fellow female artists, Lucille Blanche, who lived downstairs from Frida, and Pele Delap, a young art student at the California School of Fine Arts, known today as the San Francisco Art Institute. They would gather together in Lucille's studio and create drawings, either separately or together. Sometimes they'd pass around a piece of paper and make a composite drawing. Other times they'd choose a theme like maternity, and each would draw their own version, as seen here in Pele's drawing, where she states that we're looking at, quote, "a voluptuous woman with flowing red hair and 5 breasts, nursing 5 babies of different races," end quote. Whatever they drew, it had a, quote, "wicked, witty touch," according to Pele. For Frida, this meant including blood, saying in English, "Let's draw the bloodiest thing we can think of." I realized that these nights of creative experimentation led to one of Frida's first major breakthroughs in style. The balanced and lovely cross-cultural portraits Frida had been creating in San Francisco, like the one of Jean on the left, suddenly changed in style with portrait of Luther Burbank, a well-known botanist and horticulturist who became famous for his hybrid fruits, vegetables, flowers, and trees. Luther's life's work clearly inspired Frida to deviate from her style and create the man as a hybrid, part human, part tree. Gone are the obvious symbols of Mexican colonial paintings and retablos. But Mexican and Aztec notions of the interconnectedness of life and death inform this innovative painting, and she's incorporated blood. Now, Frida and Diego visited Burbank's house in Santa Rosa, California. And while Luther had died in 1926, his widow, Elizabeth, still lived in the house. They had the opportunity to see and experience Luther's beloved gardens, including the huge cedar of Lebanon tree seen here. Luther was buried under it, and Frida places his skeleton under the ground, and with blood still coursing through it, it nourishes the roots of the tree, which sustains the man tree above. Luther's life's work and his burial place obviously inspired Frida. But again, the idea to create a hybrid man tree would have seemed natural due to images of Aztec hybrid human plant deities or Day of the Dead skeletons, some with trees, flowers, and cacti growing from the bones of the skeleton. Now, clearly living in San Francisco and visiting Burbank's home in Santa Rosa had a big impact on Frida as a person and as an artist. She was painting a lot and thinking about having an exhibition. Yet most would say Frida disliked what she called Gringolandia. And this is true, but it's too simplistic. Yes, she disliked aspects of the United States, hated the injustices she witnessed, but She also found San Francisco to be a beautiful city surrounded by water. She marveled at Chinatown. She loved the Metropolitan Museum in New York, got a kick out of American movies and actresses such as Mae West or actors such as Charlie Chaplin. I wanted to understand more fully what it was that Frida disliked and what it was she liked. What had the most impact, either in a positive or a negative manner? Now, when discussing Frida's time in the United States, understandably, scholars tend to focus on these two breakthrough paintings because they foreground Frida's physical and emotional pain. And this is a subject that's very much emphasized in the literature. And it is true that Detroit is the place where Frida underwent physical and emotional trauma due to a miscarriage. And we can really see this trauma on her face in this drawing in the center called Self-Portrait 1932. But what we also see in this drawing is another eye, a third eye placed here on her chest. And this third eye allows her to possess perception beyond ordinary sight. And we also see then what she created in this time period was this very powerful lithograph, Frida and the Miscarriage, which can be seen in the exhibition right here, along with this important drawing as well, right next to it. Now, if Frida's marriage license in 1929 listed her as a housewife, then her Detroit library card 3 years later reveals her changed status, artist. And one thing that happens with this lithograph is she now holds this heart-shaped artist palette, the one that she had placed in Diego's hand earlier. And so while I believe that she definitely had ambitions to be an artist in this period in San Francisco, by the time you get to Detroit and she's gone through another trauma, I say another because of course the first major trauma is when she's 18 and is in a bus trolley accident. But now in the second major trauma, when she's had a miscarriage, she is really reborn and reborn as an artist with a capital A. And we see that here visually, as well as here on her library card. But we have to also keep in mind that while the paintings My Birth and Henry Ford Hospital are significant for Frida's breakthrough, she also created two of the most politically charged paintings while she was in the United States. Self-Portrait on the Borderline Between Mexico and the United States on the left, created in Detroit, and My Dress Hangs There from 1933, created while she was in New York. Now, both of these paintings are filled with images that are difficult to decipher in a reproduction. There are many objects that I noticed in these paintings, but when I got to see them in 2008, I could see so much more. For example, in My Dress Hangs There, in reproductions, I certainly had seen that all of these images in the foreground are collaged onto her painting. Newspaper clippings. Depression with people in breadlines and protesting. But when I saw the painting in person for the first time in 2008, I noticed three signs that really jumped out at me, and they are just left of the bridge here. So down here, you can see them here. And if we go over here, I'll point out those signs, because what I noticed was first this sign, which says Smash Scottsboro Frame Up. Then I noticed this sign here, which says Negro White. And then this sign down below, which says Negro and White, dressmaker on the picket lines. Now, if you go to the exhibit at the DeYoung, you will see this painting hanging on the wall, and you can look closely and see these protest signs. And you can easily miss them, right, if you don't look for them. But they're important details. And always with Frida's paintings, there are details there for you to decipher if you choose to do so. Now, I have a detective's spirit, so I'm always interested in those details. Some people are not, but if you are, they're there for you. And so I wanted to know why Frida had included these signs. They were taken from newspapers, so she was making a choice as to which photos to cut out and collage into her painting. The reference to a dressmaker on the picket lines takes on significance when you realize that Frida has placed her dress, her own dress, front and center. In fact, many of the protesters walk underneath her dress as if the dress is watching over them. What's also significant is that there's an emphasis on Black and white workers united in their call for better wages, job security, and racial justice. I wondered if Frida had experienced any of the protests in the streets of New York. Did she have direct experience, or was she an observer who had only experienced them by reading the newspaper? Well, I began to do some research. And I discovered that in this period of the early 1930s, the Communist Party of the United States was promoting unity between Black and white workers. Under the party's legal arm called the International Labor Defense, they hired New York criminal defense attorney Samuel Leibowitz for the appeals of 9 African-American youths, referred to as the Scottsboro Boys. These 9 youths, ranging in age from 19 to 12, had been unjustly accused of raping 2 white women on a freight train in Alabama toward the end of March 1931. At their first trial, it was a hung jury, but Judge Hawkins declared a mistrial and sentenced 8 of the 9 to the electric chair. In January of 1933, when the first appeals case for Haywood Patterson commenced, his chances of being found innocent were promising due to his new lawyer, Samuel Leibowitz, and one of the women, Ruby Bates, recanting her rape accusation. Yet, in April of 1933, once again, an all-white jury found Patterson guilty, sentencing him to death. On April 9th, an outraged public took to the streets in Harlem, and then again on April 25th, and on May Day in New York City's Union Square, and in Washington, D.C. on May 8th, 1933, led by Haywood Patterson's mother, Janie Patterson, seen here. Tensions were so high that the judge presiding over the remaining cases of the Scottsboro Boys were postponed. I soon realized that the high-profile Scottsboro case, combined with the Communist Party's sponsorship of legal services, of marches, of the signing and distributing of petitions to free the African-American youths, was an important part of Frida's experience while in the United States. She not only would have known about the call for racial and class justice through the newspapers, but she and her husband, muralist Diego Rivera, were caught up in the energy of protest. Diego had begun working on his mural for the new RCA building in Rockefeller Plaza on April 2nd. Frida wrote on the back of her painting, My Dress Hangs There, that she painted it while Diego was making his Man at the Crossroads mural at Rockefeller Plaza. Both were creating during this tense time, and both include images of protest and images of Black men. In Diego's mural, on the left side, seen here in a blurry close-up, there are 2 signs that read, Want work, not charity, and Divided we starve, united we eat. On the right side of the mural over here, Diego has placed images that are supposed to represent justice for all, with a soldier, a white worker, Vladimir Lenin, and a Black male worker, and they are all holding hands, better seen here in a close-up. Diego took the Black man, reviled in American society, and made him a figure of unity in the communist Soviet Union. It would not be long before Diego's inclusion of Lenin, a Russian communist revolutionary and theorist, would be cause for a controversy. On May 4th, Nelson Rockefeller asked Diego to remove Lenin's face from the mural, and Diego refused. Ultimately, Diego was paid in full, but asked to leave on May 9th, and the mural, which was close to completion, was ultimately destroyed. This prompted more protests in New York City, seen here. But before the protests of the destruction of Diego's murals came on May 17th, the Nazi book burnings occurred on May 10th. In 34 towns, university students throughout Germany threw their books by authors such as Brecht, Hemingway, and Helen Keller into fire pits to, quote, cleanse the German spirit, end quote. The American Jewish Congress had coordinated in advance huge nationwide demonstrations. A crowd estimated at 80 to 100,000 marched through New York City streets for approximately 6 hours. You could say that New York City in 1933 was consumed with protest marches. Protesting the huge wealth gap in a capitalist system made more prominent by the economic depression, protesting the inequities of a racist legal system that guaranteed a Black man would be sentenced to death for being accused of raping a white woman, protesting the rise of Nazism with its anti-Semitic government policies and intensive propaganda program, protesting the suppression of the freedom of expression. After having a fuller understanding of this history, the newspaper clippings of marches collaged in the front of Frida's painting became much more than a generalized sign of the times. They made me feel the anguish, pain, frustration, and fear in this tumultuous period, as well as the elation of unity in the face of grave dangers and dire outcomes. In Frida's painting, Lady Liberty can be seen back here in the background, her arm and torch held high, with independent Mae West over here, and Frida's Tewana dress hanging in the center, hovering again above the protesters. Perhaps Frida is saying that it's time for women to have real political and economic power. Frida's political painting and Diego's political mural were not isolated works of art that expressed such social and political issues. Frida was surrounded by artists who were galvanized by the Scottsboro legal battle that went on for years, such as Hideo Noda's gouache, Scottsboro Boys, or Isamu Noguchi's sculpture, Death. These works would have resonated with Frida because she had seen the Jim Crow system of segregation firsthand when a year before she painted My Dress Hangs There, she stopped in Little Rock, Arkansas with her friend and fellow artist, Lucienne Bloch. As the two were walking through the train station, they saw a sign that stated, quote, for Negroes, indicating the separate area for boarding. According to Bloch's granddaughter, Lucienne Allen, quote, Frida insisted my grandmother take this picture of her because they were both angered by such blatant racism, end quote. In Lucienne Bloch's journal, she wrote of this experience, quote, it is like being in another world to see such outrageous medievalism, end quote. In 2008, this was a photograph I'd never seen before, and I'd never read anything about it, but it became one of several threads I pulled together to better understand Frida's experiences with racism while in the United States and her use of protest imagery in My Dress Hangs There, as well as her depiction of a beautiful African-American woman with an active gaze as seen here in Portrait of Ava Frederick. Nothing of substance had been written about this portrait. I had my work cut out for me. I also wanted to know more, though, about Self-Portrait on the Borderline between Mexico and the United States, again created in Detroit in 1932. It became the focal point of my talk at that conference at the University of San Francisco. Like My Dress Hangs There, it's a complex painting with a lot of imagery to absorb. A smoke-belching Ford factory, high rises, and machines occupying the right side, and the ruins of a pyramid, a crumbling wall, a skull, two ceramic figurines, flowers, and cacti occupying the left. In the middle on a border marker stands Frida with perfect posture. She wears a colonial-style floor-length pastel pink dress with fitted bodice. While it's easy to get lost in all the images, once again, details matter. This proper-looking woman becomes a provocateur when you notice her tight-fitting bodice and nipples. Her obvious bralessness would have raised eyebrows among the Detroit area's upper crust. But Frida doesn't look ashamed. She stands tall as an independent Mexican woman, symbolized by the lit cigarette in one hand and the paper Mexican flag in the other. She also stands tall as a mestiza, a woman of mixed ethnicities, wearing a colonial-style dress and a beaded necklace bearing the colors of the Mexican flag. It's a hybrid outfit, and it's appropriate, as scholar and poet Gloria Anzaldúa observes, quote, "The Mexico-United States border is a site where many different cultures touch each other, and the permeable, flexible, and ambiguous shifting grounds lend themselves to hybrid images," end quote. Frida plays up her hybridity through her outfit and her connection to both sides of the border. She also plays up her strong gaze, something she'd been perfecting as an adolescent, seen here on the left wearing a man's suit. And it was something that she would continue to perfect, this piercing gaze, as seen in the center with Self-Portrait with Necklace, created also in the United States in 1933, and then further intensified in Self-Portrait from 1940, seen on the right. But in 2007, I had many unanswered questions about this 1932 painting, both in terms of symbolism and the context in which Frida created it. What was Frida's experience of the US-Mexico border, given the anti-Mexican feeling and the forced deportation of approximately 1.8 million in the 1930s? Why does Frida place the American flag in the smoke of Ford industry? What did she think of Henry Ford and his River Rouge plant? What was happening with Ford workers around the time she was making this painting? I found out, for example, that on New Year's Day, 1933, Ford cut employees' wages for the second time in 3 years, prompting 9,000 workers to go on strike. A little over a month later, a reproduction of Frida's painting was shown in the February Detroit News article, "Wife of Master Mural Painter Gleefully Dabbles in Works of Art." While journalist Florence Davies belittles Frida's talent as an artist with her choice of words, "gleefully dabbles," in the title, she conceded in the article that Frida's painting is by no means a joke, end quote. And this becomes apparent when comparing her painting to other US artists like Charles Sheeler's American Landscape, which glorifies Ford's River Rouge factory. So in 2007, I still had many unanswered questions about this painting and Frida's time in Detroit, as well as a trip she took by train to Mexico with her American friend and fellow artist Lucienne Bloch in September of 1932. Now, Frida had just begun this painting when she received word that her mother was ill. She left for Mexico, and after she returned to Detroit a month and a half later, she completed this painting, Self-Portrait on the Borderline. Significantly, it's at this point that she had just crossed the border twice. And so what types of experiences did she have? Thankfully, I had Lucienne Bloch's insightful journal to provide some answers to this question and many more. So in 2008, I continued working on my analysis of this painting, and I was working on it for another symposium. This time, the symposium accompanied that San Francisco Museum of Modern Art exhibition of Frida's work in 2008. The theme of the symposium was an idea that Whitney Chadwick and I had proposed, and it was to focus on the 3 US cities of San Francisco, Detroit, and New York. Whitney discussed Frida in San Francisco, I discussed Frida in Detroit, and Hayden Herrera discussed Frida in New York. I felt as if I had come full circle from my early days of discovering Frida due to both Whitney Chadwick and Hayden Herrera. It was one of the high points of my career. I was also thrilled to meet and speak with art historian Victor Zamudio Taylor, artist Amalia Mesa Baines, and curator scholar Terry Romero. They had been symposium respondents, and the conversations with all 3, both on stage and in private, made me realize that many of the questions I had about Frida's artistic sources and her creative development, both before coming to the United States and while she was in the United States, didn't have clear answers or any at all. I needed to conduct a lot more research. So in the weeks after that symposium at SF MoMA, a feeling grew inside of me that I needed to write the book I wanted to read. I envisioned a book for a general audience detailing Frida's personal and creative journey while living in the United States from 1930 to 1933. I wanted to write a story, not a scholarly essay or book, but a story that would be well researched and factual, yet written in a style that would allow readers to feel as if they were on this journey with Frida. As the documentary filmmaker Ken Burns put it, quote, "History is mostly story," end quote. For it is the great storytelling tradition found in most cultures and time periods that allows us to understand complex information in a manner that sticks because we feel something. Perhaps writer Maya Angelou says it best. "I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel," end quote. My hope is that this cross-cultural journey will inspire people to think about Frida in new and profound ways, to understand her more fully as a complex, brilliant woman who in her early 20s struggled to find her own voice as an artist and person, but who ultimately broke through to a signature style that she would build upon for the rest of her career. Now, I believe Frida had everything inside of her that she needed to produce a major breakthrough in her art before coming to the United States. However, experiencing both her own personal turmoil and the United States' political and social turmoil created a combustible energy that produced artworks such as Portrait of Luther Burbank, Henry Ford Hospital, My Birth, Self-Portrait on the Borderline, and My Dress Hangs There. As one of Frida's favorite authors, D.H. Lawrence said, quote, "All art partakes of the spirit of place in which it is produced," end quote. This place happened to be the United States. And so the word America in the title of my book references Frida's time in the United States of America. But because this is a story about a Mexican artist, it's an America seen through Frida's eyes. She brings a very different and complicated perspective to what we call in this country the American experience. For her, America is both the United States and Latin America. It is the problematic North American border relationship between Mexico and the United States. And it is the promise of Pan-Americanism, which was taken up by artists, intellectuals, and social activists in the 1930s, including Frida's husband, Diego Rivera. Now, Frida is an icon today, but in her role as a beloved icon, as scholar Margaret Lindauer has observed, quote, "Kahlo became synonymous with a look rather than with her creative production," end quote. That is, Frida's look is more well known than the contents and interpretations of her paintings. To this end, in tracing her creative process, I wanted to look closely at the paintings. I thought it would be incredible if I could somehow discuss the paintings in a way that allowed readers to step into them as if they were rooms. Instead of looking at a work of art from a distance, as one might in a gallery or museum, I thought if I could create a greater intimacy between Frida's paintings and readers, then people might gain a deeper understanding of her creative process and the multiple layers of her often profound works of art, layers that derive from hybrid images, Catholic, Aztec, colonial paintings, modern paintings, Mexican cultural traditions, subjects from the United States, etc. Likewise, in the epilogue, I wanted to give a sense of how the new breakthrough paintings created in the United States affected her later work. Here we can see that the use of blood and red strings were first used in her paintings in the United States, but these two symbols, as well as the heart, become more prevalent in her work after she returns to Mexico in 1933. And to this end, I wrote the prologue to emphasize the significance of blood, the heart, and Aztec traditions for Frida. And I'd actually like to end by reading you the prologue. It begins with a quote. The Aztec sun god Huitzilopochtli threw a rebel's heart into Lake Texcoco and proclaimed, when you see an eagle perched on a cactus holding a snake in its mouth, this is where you shall build your city. Aztec myth. Frida was lying in a blood-soaked bed. Small creases in the white cotton sheets had absorbed the red liquid like the fruit of a prickly pear cactus sliced open. Glistening magenta, fruit of the earth, the blood miracle that consecrated the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, now surrounded Frida's naked body with the pain of death. The eagle and snake were missing in the dark early morning hours, but the sun still came up, casting light on Frida's dark, damp hair covered with salty tears. She wailed in agony and despair. Diego, frantic, didn't know what to do. The blood, the screaming, it was all too much for him. He rushed into the living room, muttering something about the doctor. A call was made, but Frida would have to suffer for another hour before an ambulance arrived. At the Henry Ford Hospital, Frida, recumbent on a gurney, was whisked through a long, narrow cement hallway in the basement, her eyes fixed on what she perceived to be multicolored pipes on the ceiling. Look, Diego, que precioso, how beautiful, she exclaimed. This was the last bit of beauty Frida would encounter for a while. We descend from death, Carlos Fuentes sings out. Death smiles, dances, and provides the sweet caresses of a lover. The skeletons of Jose Guadalupe Posada fill the imagination, especially during Day of the Dead celebrations, embracing Mexicans with their origins, holding on to Aztec times. The past is always present, Fuentes whispers. The heart, center of the human body, is the axis mundi. Keep the universe in motion, the Aztecs proclaimed. Feed the gods. Blood was the cuisine the gods favored. Blood creates a line from the earthly to the divine, from death to life, from darkness to light. The duality of life for the Aztecs, as for Frida, was a bringing together of opposites. Everything is all in one, Frida wrote. Seating these opposites side by side to share the blood of death and life, she painstakingly stitched them together with paint, one small stroke at a time. Blood and the concept of duality became central for Frida's art and life while living in the United States. She was a child of the Mexican Revolution, as she liked to say, a passionate defender of the underdog. But it took living in the United States, a place she longed to visit since her teenage years, to shake her foundations of home and homeland, forcing her to see a different reality. She struggled and stumbled in this foreign country, cursing it at times, embracing it at others, but always she visualized it with a keen eye for the humor that bubbled under the surface of pain. Frida loved life. It came through in her infectious, throaty laugh and in her direct manner of speaking. Even in English, sometimes she'd exaggerate her Mexican accent when necessary to spice up the conversation or punctuate a point. It came through in her way of dressing, whether she was wearing a man's suit or a colorful peasant-style pleated skirt and top. Details matter. The right Aztec-inspired earrings, the perfect length cane, the precise size of jadeite beads, and the best shade of lipstick. Everything was done with love. Love is the only reason for living, she proclaimed. Fuentes said Frida was, quote, a natural pantheist, a woman and an artist involved in the glory of universal celebration, an explorer of the interrelatedness of all things, a priestess declaring everything created as sacred, end quote. When she came to the United States at 23 with her husband, muralist Diego Rivera, she was still at the beginning of this exploration, with eyes wide open, seeing how all things were interrelated and integrating this universal celebration into her art. The young Frida was a novice painter. Her husband, on the other hand, was 44 and at the height of his creative powers. When Time magazine ran a short article on Diego a year into his stay in the United States, it referred to Frida as, quote, his pretty little Mexican wife, the former Frida Kahlo, end quote. Frida would always be physically petite, But her identity as Frida Kahlo, the great painter, grew in stature as she grew creatively and personally in the United States. Her first stop was San Francisco, a place she dreamt about for years. The day before, Diego received the letter from the American architect Timothy Pfluger inviting him to paint a mural on the wall of his recently completed Pacific Stock Exchange building in San Francisco. Frida had her recurring dream. She saw herself waving goodbye to her family as she left her beloved Mexican homeland for San Francisco, the city of the world, as she called it. It amazed Diego that Frida's dream had been so prescient. Frida knew she had to start packing because she believed you had to, quote, protect what destiny has given you, end quote. Thank you. And now I will...
That was wonderful, Celia. Thank you so much. It's just so fascinating to learn about the evolution of such a beloved artist. So thank you so much for taking the time with us tonight. We have some questions here in the chats. So I'm going to throw you some questions. We have a few minutes left to answer them.
Sure.
So the first question that came in is, how long did Frida and Diego live at 716 Montgomery Street? And are there any stories of interest from their time there?
They lived there for approximately 6 months. And are there any stories of was it of interest or intrigue or something?
I guess either, yeah.
Oh, let's see. I guess one of the stories is that there were some murals that were found on the wall at some point, and I don't have the exact date of when they were found. And they were, I guess, created by Diego. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that SF MoMA has some of the murals or the drawings for the murals. That I never had that verified, but I have been in contact actually with somebody who used to have an office in that building. And he has been trying to get us access to that building, of course, trying to deal with COVID times and whatnot. Now, I did get to go into the flat where Frida and Diego stayed. So I did get to see it. And that's why I had a pretty good idea of where her studio would have been located, et cetera. But I think there's also another thing that's kind of interesting is that there is a club next door to the flat, and at least, I don't know, a few years ago, I don't know if it's still there are photographs from this time period, black and white photographs that you can see of I don't know if there are a lot of Frida and Diego. There are a few, I think. And so you have that. You also have, there's an unpublished manuscript called the Queen of Montgomery Street that was written about Frida and Diego, and I quote some of that in my book, but it gives you a little bit of a feel for what it was like, even though it's like supposed to be somewhat fictionalized. You can tell that it's mostly probably accurate, so you get a real sense for kind of what it was like when they were living there. And so I tried to piece together a lot of this, in my book to give a feel of what it was like for them to live there.
That's so cool. Please keep us posted on your journey if you get access. We'd love to know. Okay, so the next question. The relationship between Diego and Frida served as a vehicle for joy, pain, and was a catalyst in Frida becoming a powerful creative force. Can you address how she came into her own as an artist?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, one thing, of course, this is obvious statement, but I think it's always really difficult to come into your own as an artist, number one. But number two, when you are married to an artist who, as I stated, was at the height of his creative powers. And you can easily be overshadowed by that artist. You also are often, especially if you're a woman, you're often accused of being derivative of your husband's style. And I think what's really incredible with Frida and her journey as an artist is that she did not just copy Diego. There are some images early on in 1920, in the late 20s, where you can see that, yeah, she's being influenced by him in a general way, but there were lots of artists working in this same style and with subject matter connected to the indigenous people of Mexico, to the lower classes. In this post-revolutionary period of the 20s, a lot of artists were trying to figure out, this concept of Mexicanidad. What did it mean to be Mexican in this new era? And so the artists are working this out, not only the muralists, but also, easel painters and printmakers. And so you can certainly see that influence on her. But when she's in the United States, I think you really start to see her come into her own. That portrait of Luther Burbank, it's an amazing, innovative portrait. And it's very different from anything she'd done. And I didn't do it in this talk, but if you compare it to what Diego does, he has this, mural that he's created for the Pacific Stock Exchange, Allegory of California. And he includes Luther Burbank as well. And he shows him in a profile position, pollinating a plant. And while, of course, it's different because it's one part of a larger mural, nevertheless, you can see that the way Frida creates it is completely different. And again, it's so innovative. So she really starts to, come into her own, finding her own voice. And as I said, when we get to Detroit and she goes through another trauma, she is just kind of, I think, shaken to her very core. She also seems to have had, as I said, some kind of experience where now she's starting to create the third eye, and she will continue to use that third eye. And it's as if she has gained some kind of artistic sight, as if she can see things in a different light. And you start to see that in her work. And so again, I don't see her work as derivative of Diego's. I think she becomes very strong in her own sense of self and her own creative vision. However, what I do show in the book is she and Diego are having this creative dialogue all along. So they are in conversation with one another, which I found to be really fascinating. But as I said, she becomes her own person, and it continues on after she leaves the United States and is in Mexico. And then it just seems to get stronger and stronger, her own creative voice.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but I hope you take a minute to read the chats. There's more questions that we didn't get to, and our audience is so appreciative of your time and your research and your presentation. So thank you so much, Celia. We cannot thank you enough.
Well, thank you so much. It's been an honor to be able to speak on behalf of the de Young. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Celia. That was awesome. Frida Kahlo, Appearances Can Be Deceiving, is now on view at the de Young Museum. Tickets are selling out fast, so we recommend booking your tickets in advance online at tickets.famsf.org. And also check out our podcast, Local Voices, our local artists inspired by Frida Kahlo, on anchor.fm/famsf. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.